Can you all hear me? Great. Welcome to MMS 2012. This is kind of exciting. This is, I guess, the first big presentation. Well, I guess there was another session an hour ago, but this is the first big session in here. So I guess we'll get to work out all the kinks in this demo system here. I'm hoping it works. Great. For those of you, I apologize for the lineup outside. This is crazy. This is like one of the this is the biggest MMS event ever. Kind of a combination of people excited about this year coming, and of course with can you hear me now? So pretty much people excited about Config Manager 2012 coming out this week. This is going to be exciting. So let's get into this. This is customizing the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. My name is Keith Garner. I am a principal consultant and senior software design engineer. And for the past 6 years, I've been pretty lucky that I've got to work with Extreme Consulting and also with the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. For the past 6 years, I've actually been one of the other developers on the MDT Toolkit team and started off with BDD 2007, MDT 2008, MDT 2010, 2010 Update 1, 2012. And been pretty lucky there. I also worked on some other projects like the P2P Migration Toolkit. Although right now I was actually traded to another group at Microsoft. Just a couple months ago, I got traded off to Microsoft IT to assist them with trying to ramp up MDT 2012 and SCCM 2012 for a new kind of operating system called Windows 8. So that's been kind of interesting here. We had Windows 8 Consumer Preview running in Microsoft the same day that you guys all got on the internet, and that was pretty cool. So moving forwards, we're going to work to make sure Windows 8 has a great experience with inside Microsoft, but we're dog-fooding our own processes. We're making sure that MDT and SCCM work great with Windows 8. I did it. I finished it. It's done. I set up an MDT deployment system. It's great. It's perfect. It's a model of simplicity. You answer a couple wizards, and it's completely automated. What's that? You wanted me to add something else? Something unique? Something different? An extra component? What does it involve? Really? That's going to be hard to do because that's not really fully automatable. We have to actually tweak a little bit. Maybe we have to prompt the user. We actually have to maybe run some custom scripts at the end because, wow, that's hard to do. Well, how do we do that? MDT out of the box allows you to add individual components, but wow, you're asking something that requires a little more thought here, a little more custom work. Well, that's what this session is about. This session is about trying to understand, make sure that you guys understand when the opportunities arise to extend MDT. MDT out of the box works great. We can do a full deployment of an operating system, applications, other things. But there are some times when we got a custom business rules. We got this quirky little business app that it's not quite working right. It requires a little extra effort and a little customization here. So going into here, I do want to say that you should be familiar with what MDT is, pretty much what the basics are. You should be kind of comfortable with basic kind of scripting, both Visual Basic, maybe a bash script, maybe a little bit of PowerShell. We'll get into that a little bit later. And maybe you've already tried extending MDT in the basic ways. Maybe you tried modifying custom settings innies and maybe adding a database and other areas where you're trying to extend MDT. We're not going to cover basic MDT administration in this session, things like databases, maybe a little bit of databases, but how to add applications and that sort of thing. But we will cover some debugging tools and tricks, and that'll kind of help you out moving forwards. So just a quick review of what MDT is. MDT is a tool used to help deploy operating systems. It's a large, complex process. Oh, geez, it's crazy. The amount of things that can go wrong and the requirements necessary. And for those of you who've ever, maybe you started to use the inbox, the Wake or the ADK to go out and create something from scratch, maybe you've added your own processes, please don't do that. That's what MDT was designed to do. Anytime you thought of going out and saying, hey, let's build our own custom solution from scratch using scripts and all that sort of thing. Nah, MDT has already done that. We've already created scripts and an entire framework moving forwards. Try that first, try adopting it, try modifying it, seeing how it works, and then seeing how you can tweak that moving forwards. Most of the product, at least on the client side, is available as scripts, which is great. These are scripts that are available as source code. You can go ahead and look at them, reverse engineer it, modify it, do whatever you need to, which is really great. And it also integrates with existing Microsoft technologies like the Microsoft WES deployment server, SCCM, both System Configuration Manager 2010 and 2012. It's very much an industry standard, fully supported by Microsoft. You can call up Microsoft and actually get product support services with MDT. And best of all, it's free. Go ahead and download it, try it out. There's no upside, there's no upsell. This is the full product and it's available for free. A little bit of a tour of MDT as a whole. During the MDT process, and this is going to be important, and we may actually come back to this slide, but during the installation of MDT, we're going to want to set up both the server of our environment and set up an actual run installation on a client. On the server side, we're going to want to gather various things like operating systems, applications, drivers, language pack, other kind of packages, and other custom scripts to collect them all together onto our deployment share. We're going to get that ready onto other types of media. We're going to push that out using Pixie, USB, DVD, whatever you want to do as an actual deployment mechanism. And when it actually comes time to run it, it's kind of important to remember that MDT will initiate it from something like Pixie or USB or DVD media. And we're going to want to start collecting information from the user, either from directly through a wizard. We want to collect information from a database. We're going to want to collect information from other sources. These are what we call variables. These are the role-driven installation. MDT starts off, it will collect the basic information about the machine, but it's also going to want to collect variables throughout the process. Those variables are then drive the rest of the installation. Once we're done with the wizard, the MDT Light Touch wizard, we're going to want to stop, and we'll continue. We'll start up the task sequencer. This is the standard SCCM standalone task sequencer used with SCCM way back, and it's packaged with MDT. We run it. We run a series of steps. Those steps are basically command line operations. We kick that off, and we use the variables we collected earlier to actually continue running forwards. Of course, there's a time when you need to do more, and that's what we're here for. First of all, there are various points along the way when we can stop and say, we want to modify this, or we want to extend this, or we want to automate this, we want to customize this in some way. This is kind of the opportunities for extending MDT. The first opportunity we have is customizing the server. And for starters, we're going to discuss a little bit about how to extend using PowerShell. PowerShell is an amazing product being used at Microsoft right now on Windows, at least in the server environment. It's turning out to be a really de facto environment for scripting on the server. And we'll describe how to extend the server of the MDT console using PowerShell. Also, a little bit about databases, web services. I'm going to just do a quick little talk about that. Then we're going to talk about where opportunities to extend on the client, starting off with what is custom settings, any, boot any, how do we extend that? There's more you could do than just standard text. How to customize your own wizard pages, opportunities to change steps in the task sequence, and opportunities to write custom scripts. We're not going to really cover MDT UDI or SCCM extensions for MDT right now, although most of the customizations, at least in the task sequence and the custom scripts, will extend over quite well. So opportunity number one, PowerShell on the console. And this was really been great for the past couple, seeing this past couple of years. I can remember when PowerShell started off with It was called Monad. It was a top secret project at Microsoft, and people thought it was weird, and now we're starting to see just how weird it is, but how cool it is and how extensible and how powerful it is as well. MDT uses PowerShell as the engine. When you start up the MDT console, you're not actually using the console to modify the files directly. MDT console constructs a PowerShell script and then runs that PowerShell script. So pretty much everything you do in the console is run through PowerShell. In fact, everything you do in the console is run through PowerShell, which makes it great because that means that it's pretty much functionally complete in the PowerShell language. So anything you could do in the console, we know that we can do in PowerShell via script. Actually, let's just show you here how that works. I did install the console. Yep, there it is right here. So here we have a standard deployment workbench console. Let's go ahead, and this is empty. I haven't set this one up at all. Okay, well, let's go ahead and start up a new deployment share. We're going to create it in the C drive. Great, that's great, whatever. Yes, I know, sure, thing, yes. Gosh, it takes forever just clicking through all those buttons here. But in the final screen here, and for those of you who have used MDT before, you'll have the opportunity to cut and paste the output. Maybe if there's an error generated, if you already have that share created, that the files already existed, if something else happened. But there's this other button here at the bottom, View Script. Well, what does that do? This is Format, Word Wrap, View, Font. Let's enlarge that here to 20, nice and big. This is the script that was run to create this deployment share. That's it. It's a little bit long here. We have to first step, we have to import a specific module, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and you can see that that's located in Program Files, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, bin, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, PSD1. And that's just a script that will import some various libraries. And then we create a new PS drive. This is a PowerShell drive object. So if we were to go into, and this is kind of an important point, and I should probably take the opportunity, PowerShell, if I could type today, get PS drive. Great. So this is all of the drives available on PowerShell at this particular moment. We can go into dir C and see what's in the root of the C drive, but we could also go into dir h key local machine /. So this is, we take various objects and we're making a drive out of it. Now, the registry isn't really a drive, but we can do a directory listing, we can get objects, we can open up parts of the directory just like we can a regular drive, and that's what we're doing in this case. We are opening up and modifying drives. And that's what MDT is doing here as well. We are actually constructing a drive. In this case, the drive is called DS001, and provider, MDT, root, deployment share, and the network path is Venetian, okay, deployment share, and we're going to add it to the persistent drive. What is a persistent drive? Just a quick note about that here. If we were to go back to, don't save, if we were to go back to our console here, we can see that now we have a list of deployment shares. Now, for those of you who actually in your environment, you've gone out and created several different deployment shares that you've linked to, and you can copy back and forth between the deployment shares. That's fairly easy to do with PowerShell. But this is a persistent drive. When you open up the console again, you're actually going to open up this drive and it's going to be available again. So let's actually go out here. Let's exit PowerShell. Well, actually, let's go ahead and create an application while we're at it. And this will just be a quick little application as well. Application without source files, Microsoft application test version 1.0. The command line is cmd.exe/c echo hello world. For those of you programmers out there, the working directory is just the default dot, doesn't matter. Next. Let's view the script for this one. This one we have, we're importing the module, keyboard here, and importing the module again. This is the libraries used that MDT uses. We are connecting up to the particular drive object, which is this DS001. And then we're running an application. We're running import MDT application, and we're importing the whole thing in. So one of the cool things about that then means is if you have, say for example, you have a huge database of applications that you need to slam into MDT. Not huge, maybe 20 or something like that. And you're of course worried that your packaging team might have fat finger something, and so you want to make sure it's right. You've already qualified that it works. You have a list of tables that you want. Great, you can use a script like this to import directly. Let's actually go into PowerShell now and actually see what this looks like. PowerShell, go into here. Let's do an add, PSSNAP, add PSS snap-in, Microsoft, BDD, PS snap-in. For those of you who were paying attention, one of the first projects I worked on at within the MDT team was actually BDD, Business Desktop Deployment, and that's where that name comes from. It's kind of a legacy left over there. Let's go help MDT. What's this display? Oh, there it is. Now we have a list of all of the MDT objects. Now that we added in the snap-in object, it also imported in a list of commandlets in PowerShell terminology. One of the options we have is to restore MDT persistence drive. So restore MDT persistent drive. What does that do? Great. Now we actually have an object called DS001. Let's change directory to DS001 and see what we get. Great. Now we have this. Now we're actually modifying our environment in PowerShell. We're not going into the console. We're actually modifying it. But let's go into Applications and see if there it is. There's our MIC test 01. Let's see, is it over here in Applications, refresh? There it is, MIC test 001. We can go into get object, get item, MIC test 1.0, and we can get that particular object. Let's go ahead and foo equals, so we're going to get the particular item, this Microsoft test 01, and we're going to place the object into foo. Let's see what foo has to say here. These are all the properties available with it. We could also get the name, PS path. We can get the command line. Where's the command line here? Command line. COMMAND line, and it should return back the command line we edited. So this is great. We can actually now use PowerShell to modify a command line. Say, for example, you provided something, you entered in a series of command lines into MDT, and you realize, oops, I messed up. It wasn't this command line. It actually, I fat-fingered something, and I actually need to go through and remove it. Oh, dear. We have to go through and modify 20 or so applications. We can create a script to go in and actually modify the command line for all objects, do some sort of PowerShell search. That works out great. Let's see what else, and then so we've displayed how to create a deployment share, how to create an application. This is also the beginning of what several people have created hydration scripts. This is starting off with a kernel of something, you pour some water on it, and it expands out to a big tree. The people have created hydration solutions to start off with just nothing and install the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, create a deployment share, and create all these applications. Great. Let's continue on. A little note about, so you saw that a particular item in MDT, particular application was just an item. Just like a file, just like a registry item. The terminology, the association works pretty well, and you can get that particular file or this particular application, modify it, and process it using standard PowerShell commands. There are some specific MDT PowerShell commands that are added in here, mainly the ability to add PS drives, command list to import applications, drivers, operating systems, packages, all of the standard things that you'd expect. We also have some tools to do some creating databases and modifying drives. One of my favorite up here, or one of the hardest things is when you are actually in MDT and you need to update your deployment share. This takes a while for some deployment shares. If you ever needed to update and run an operation, say for example, I wanted to create some boot WIMs that work differently on different environments. So I could write a script to update the boot ini file, update deployment share, then make a script to modify it again and for different environments, that sort of a thing, if you have that sort of environment. A couple of notes about PowerShell scripting. When you actually do decide to do PowerShell scripting, get to know the MDT commandlets there. Again, it's just as simple of when you import in, type help MDT when your PowerShell commandlets are ready. But luckily, most of the environment is available in the MDT documentation, which has really great documentation. Logging. Please add logging whenever you can. That's probably the biggest tip I have to offer when you go ahead and create a script that's thousands of lines long and you're trying to update with an environment. Logging will help you out if you ever come across problems. And I just explained what a persistent drive is, this drive object, which is basically, in our case, a deployment share, the object representation of a deployment share. Another opportunity for extension is the database, and I'm just going to mention this a little bit. MDT does have the ability to bind with a SQL Server database, which is great for lists of roles and objects. There are pretty good documentation right there right now, but it's also a static list. It's once you add it in there, it's the items are persistent within MDT. Another opportunity on the server side, so one opportunity is adding a SQL Server, another opportunity is a web service. This was covered last year with a really great presentation. If you do have a chance, I do recommend looking up that Mike Koster offered a description about this. The best way to describe what a web service is anytime you want the server to perform the bulk of the operations, maybe some customizations, maybe some opportunities. So you don't want the client to process it. You don't want it you want to send a request to a server and have the server do the processing. So a classic example is anytime you have to do any Active Directory modifications on the server side. You don't want the client to establish a secure connection because you may not be running in a secure environment. So you want to actually have the client request to the server, hey, could you help set up and prepare this environment for me? And it'll return back some information. As a very minimal example, if you were to modify your custom settings ini file, this provides the opportunity to, and I have a particular example here. In this particular case, I've created an example. Well, let's just run this here. Let's see if this is running. Exit off. I'm going to go to users, shows, desktop. That's me. And then let's run. So I have a script here, Notepad, run web service. What this is going to do is it's going to run the ZTI gather script. I don't want to collect any local information, and I want to use this web service file that I've created. So what does that web service file look like? Notepad, if I can type today, customs web service, Notepad. And what this is this is a standard custom settings ini file. But what we're doing is I'm kind of tweaking it a little bit. I'm adding a couple of new properties, and I'm actually calling this web service X. Now, this worked at home. I am wondering if this is going to work here with the firewalls, and we'll see. Okay, great. So this is just a web service I found out on the internet. And what this does is this will return back your IP address out from the internet. So as far as the internet is concerned, I'm running through a proxy, of course, and my internet address is 130.128.254.12. So, but then I used that IP address that I collected from this web service. It also identifies my country code and my location country name. And as we're running through, I'm looking at the variables that were generated from the ZTI gather script. And I can see that, yes, it filled out the information from, so server A was set to, the IP address was set to country code and country name. And there it is right there. Server A with the country code and country and name, which is great. That's, of course, a very minimal example. It's not really that exciting. But that does provide the opportunity that a web service is just a HTML, IIS web server backend. So whatever we want to tweak on the backend, we can tell the server to send other types of variables down to your client. But this is kind of advanced stuff, and there are some specific instances where this is necessary, but not in all cases. So we've just talked a little bit about the server side of things, how to set up a server to respond to clients. Let's actually go back, and I just showed you an example of a custom settings ini file. Let me go back and explain this a little bit here. As we're starting up our MDT environment, as we're going to run a task sequence, we need to collect some information first. We need to start prompting and getting some variable information. The primary script that does that in MDT is the ztigather.wsf. It's a VB script file. It will start by doing a couple things. It will get some hardware information. I just saw earlier we ran it and we got some information about some of the local hardware information, MAC address, make and model. And then it will also open up a ztigather.xml file. That XML file contains all the list of variables that MDT knows about and is ready to use, most of the ultra-common variables, which is also great because we can go back and do ztigather.xml, and there's little descriptions there about what each variable does. They're all documented, of course, but if you ever need to, as a reference of finding out what it's doing, the ztigather.xml is that location. Then during the normal processing of MDT, we're going to, if we boot up using Pixie, if we boot up using DVD or USB, we're going to want to process the bootstrap ini. The sole purpose of bootstrap ini is to tell the environment what to do, how to connect up to the main server. That's all it really cares about. Then we can connect up to the main server, and we can run custom settings ini and actually do the real processing and information. So what is in a custom settings ini file? At the very basic level, we'll start off with every custom settings ini has a settings section at the top, and we'll start off with the priority of which sections to look for. This is just an ini file. The ini files have been around since Windows 3.1, or probably even longer. They've been around forever. And it's a kind of a hacky way, but it's a very easy way to modify, and we can actually process moving forwards. Now, I mentioned earlier in the previous slide that we will only process variables that exist in that ztigather.xml file. We have the opportunity here we can either go ahead and modify that file. Nah, we don't want to do that. Or we can add our own properties that we want to process in here. So in this case, we have several properties. Default, as we go in here, skip apps on upgrade. That is actually defined in ztigather, and when we go in and process it, it will process it and it will work. My custom property is something we just defined here, so we can actually process that as well as we move forwards. But the other one there, my other property, is not defined anywhere. It's not defined in the XML file. It's not defined in the properties and the settings, so it will not really do anything. Let's, what can the variables be set to? There are, of course, we just saw on the previous slide, they could be sample strings. But this is where MDT, the custom settings, where the custom settings in the ztigather gets a little crazy. It's not just strings, it can also be environment variables. So if we define deployment route, just like you were in a standard batch script, now we can start expanding out variables. But this is where it also gets really, really weird, that we can also have scripts. So we percent and the variable name and percent, no, the percent is the standard terminology used for how to do a variable in a batch script. But in MDT, if we add a pound symbol at the beginning and the end, that tells MDT, hey, everything in between the 2 pounds there, the hash marks, go ahead and process it. That is a script. That is something defined elsewhere that's in the environment space. Go ahead and process that. So one classic example might be computer name equals. So in my environment, I want to have all computer names be MS, Microsoft, and then the MAC address. Well, computer names, how many people know what the maximum length for a computer name is? It's only about 15 characters. So if you MAC address should be 12 characters long, but then when you add the colons in for the MAC address, it expands out even longer. So that's way too long. So here in this particular case, we have a combination of both. We're running MS, and then we have a pound replace. So replace is a standard VB script intrinsic function. And we're going to then also take MAC address. So MAC address also gets processed. So the things in the percents get processed first. We're going to read out the MAC address. That was processed earlier. It gets expanded out to the big value. And then we run it through the replace command to remove all the colons, and then that compresses it down. So hopefully in the end, we should have computer name equals something. There's also opportunity to do processing based on the variables. So if we have settings, we can define a MAC address. So this is an example of a MAC address with the colons in there that are kind of hard to read. But we can go ahead and say, hey, let's go ahead and, as you're processing first, go ahead and look for the MAC address. So it will say, hey, MAC address. MAC address is a variable. Is it defined to anything? Yes, it's defined to a particular value. Oh, look for a section name in the INI file that has that value. In this case, my machine at home would return 0025B3BF and return back that particular role. There's also other tricks we can do, like subsections. So this is something I do in my lab, my deployments. I don't want to display the BitLocker screen, wizard screen, if you're running inside a virtual machine. BitLocker really doesn't make sense for virtual machines. So here's an opportunity we can say, hey, let's process the isVM section. IsVM minus and then %isVM. IsVM will return back true if we're running inside a virtual machine. And then, oh, great, now we need to look at that subsection. That subsection, then it looks through isVM equals true, and it will set skip BitLocker equals yes. Most of these are defined in the MDT documentation and are available out there. So I'm not going to go into more detail. I have a demo here. Let's actually run this. Actually, let's go through here first. So calling code within custom settings any file, the code can be any standard VB script function. And it can also be anything defined in ZTI utility. If you want to add your own custom code to add it in, I do recommend looking at user exit scripts. These are defined in the MDT documentation. User exit script, you write a VB script in a specific format, and it must contain a particular user exit and other functions. But then you define it in your custom settings any file, and then you can call anything you want in that VB script file. Great. And I have that in my particular deployment right now. For the classic example of these Lenovo machines, which, for example, don't have model numbers that are like the rest of the machines. So I do some processing to get more friendly names, for example. It's a great opportunity to extend that. And that was actually something I found on the deployment guy's blog, which is great. And debugging, so you... let's go to the particular demo here, and I can explain this a little bit further, because there's how do you actually know what you're processing in the variables.bat file, in the custom settings ini file. You want to actually call ZTI gather. ZTI gather doesn't have to be run inside of a task sequence. It can be run outside, and I will use this all the time to do just some sample processing of my environment. I don't want to actually create a custom settings ini file and then try deploying it out in my corporate environment. I want to be able to test it out first and really test it on my machine as well. So let's actually look to see what I got. I think I have a script here. I have run custom settings.cmd. Hey, that's us. So a notepad for run custom settings ini. What is this going to do? One of the things I should note that when you do process the custom settings ini file, every time you process the file over and over again, the file won't be processed. Each variable will not be processed if it already exists before. So and there are definitions inside the ZTI gather.xml script that define which variables, whether or not a variable, the last one processed will be imported, or whether the first one processed. So for testing purposes, just go ahead and wipe everything out. We just want to start off with a clean slate. We're going to delete that variables.dat file, which is basically an XML file that contains a list of variables. In that case, we're going to run C script. We're going to run the zti-gather.wsf file, which is what actually processes it. And we're going to then run our custom settings ini file. So what does the custom settings ini file look like in this case? Notepad, custom settings ini. So in this case, this is going to be a simple one. This is just an example of server A is a application, is just a string. Server B is going to be defined to an environment variable. Server C is going to be defined to some sort of function. And then the computer name is going to be set to a combination of a function and a environment variable there. So let's run it here. Actually, a mode 120,9999. I want this wider. So 4. Run custom settings ini. There's a lot of processing here. When we start off, ZTI-gather is going to gather up information about the operating system. This is great. This is a lot of information. This is we're running Windows 7 client. This is build 7601. Great. We have an IP address. Other information like the host name. This is a desktop. It is a fairly fast machine. It's an HP, and we get the make a model information. Fantastic. And we're running Windows Enterprise. Once we're done getting the hard information about the machine, then we're going to start processing our custom settings ini file. We can go down here and see that the computer name is processed first, and we can see that it's set properly to MS. And what was the MAC address? It's 2C4138. And yes, it correctly stripped out the colons out of the information and processed that. Server A was set to our static string, and I'm going to open that up again just to make sure that we're doing this right. Server A was set to a string. Server B was set to something. This is a good example. We didn't have deploy root actually set earlier. Now, in most deployment environments, deploy root is one of the first things that gets set. But in this particular case, deploy root wasn't set. So when we go through process this % deploy root and expand it out, there was nothing to expand to. So we skipped it. In this case, the deploy root was left as just a % sign, which is good, interesting. And the log path was set to the log path, and we're done processing. So this is an example of how we can go out and modify custom settings ini file to do slightly more interesting things. I do this right now in my environment with the computer name. I also do it with a particular log path. I want some more information about where logs get uploaded to, but that's a great opportunity. Another opportunity, as we're processing the custom settings ini file, now we have an opportunity to import new wizard pages. Wizard pages are in MDT. MDT creates this wizard pages using HTML. This is probably one of the few environments that scripting environments that are available under a cross of Windows XP through Windows 8 on WinPE, full OS environment. It's sure we'd like to actually use something else that's .NET framework with forms and beautiful stuff like that, but you can't run .NET using .NET framework applications using WinPE, so HTML it is. Right now, the MDT wizards use dynamic HTML, which is a combination of HTML when we also do script processing. So we recycle most of the functions available in ZTI utility and make them available in the wizard pages, which is great because then we have the opportunity to call the same scripts over and over again from both the wizard environment and the application environment. We kick off the scripts and we actually run them in the MSHTA host environment. So I don't know if any of you have gone out and maybe opened up help pages with the MDT documentation. Those are just HTML pages being rendered in a specific help environment as compared to going out to opening up a web browser, which is also HTML pages displayed in a particular environment. But when you open up an environment in IE, in Internet Explorer, these are sandboxed environments. We're not allowing scripts that are hosted on some random server to modify the local environment, open up the registry, create files, and that sort of thing. So instead, we use what's called the MSHTA. It is, let me open that up here, CMD, Control-Shift. Yes, I really want to do that. MSHTA, HTTP, bing.com. Does this work? Yep, it will. So this is a small program that then loads up the entire MSIE backend interface to display to render the web page. But these particular pages are running at administrator privileges. So any scripts that were running on the Bing page here, if they wanted to actually modify files on my local machine, they could actually do that, which is bad for running regular internet pages, but great for us because now we can actually start doing some custom processing. So we've created a back-end scripting environment where there's a wizard.hta file that the Microsoft deployment team created, and it will load up certain environments. The libraries contain all the other processing and information, and then also load up the custom wizard pages in a structured environment. The wizard pages are just an XML file, and for the most part, there are plenty of examples right now in MDT and how to. For all the wizard pages that are defined in MDT are available for viewing and modification. Go ahead, but this is just kind of an example, small one I created for my own custom deployment project at Microsoft. There was a request that, hey, we'd like to take the standard task sequence, which I just created as we create one large 100% partition size on the local machine. And some people were coming back and say, well, I think I know better. I would actually like to create a partition of a smaller size. So, okay, that's actually easy in my task sequence because I only create one environment, and I just want to adjust the size. And you guys gone into the console and actually created task sequences, and you defined, maybe created custom partitions. But one of the variables is OSD partition 0 size. This is a variable that is processed. And if we can override that, that variable will persist throughout the entire task sequence, and that's the value that will be used. So in this case, I don't want to let any user go ahead and type in something. No, they have to. We actually have to do some processing here. They could type in a partition size of 8%. That's just no good at all. So, so in this particular case, the body of the HTML, for those of you who understand HTML, we start off with the black line down here at the bottom. Disk configuration is the header. We just write a paragraph size of the operating system, and then an input. This is a text input box. The default value is 100, and the variable name is OSD partition 0 size. And when the user actually changes the variable, we'll want to go back and do some processing. The maximum size is 3 characters because 100%, and the value is, again, why do I have value twice? Okay, that's a bug. The on-property change event will kick off this function at the top here, which just does some simple processing. Is the value numeric rather than writing in cat, for example? If they write in some non-numeric value, just overwrite it and go back to 100. If it's greater than 100%, well, you can't do that. Just go back and rewrite it and go back to 100%. So let's actually see how this works here. CD users, shows, desktop, that's me, notepad, run custom wizard. In this case, and this is how it's done within the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. If you want to go into lighttouch.wsf, you'd see that we're spinning up MSHTA, which is the executable, and then we're kicking off this wizard.hta script. That's the one that actually renders the page, processes other custom files and whatnot. So in this case, we have, and I'm overriding it in this case. I'm saying, hey, I don't want you to run the standard MDT light touch wizard. I just want you to run this custom partition. And in this case, notepad custom partition, this is pretty much what you observed earlier. Let's go ahead and fix my bug of removing value there, save it, and exit out. So let's see if I'm doing it right here. So 5, run custom wizard. Great. We pop up, and this is, you'll notice that this is the only web page going on right now. There's no other web pages on the site here. For those of you who've tried out the MDT 2012, this is a beta program. This is what some of the new UI looks like, keeping it more in line with System Center. But now we can go ahead and I can type in 10%, or I can type in 104%. Nope, that didn't work. Oh, that's right, it overrode that because I didn't like the fact that I was using over 100%. Let's type in a D. Nope, that doesn't like that either, so it overrode that. So that's great. Let's actually click Finish. No, let's actually run that again. Let's actually change it to 55%. Finish. And if we were to go into Notepad, C, mini-nt, SMS-OSD, OSD logs, variables.dat, we should scroll to the very bottom and see that our OSD partition size was automatically set to 55%. So if we were to start this up again, this MDT should be smart enough to read from the variables and automatically populate that. So if you define, let's actually go back here and finish, run custom wizard. No, let's run custom partition. If you have a name, so in HTML you can have input, you can have IDs, but if the name is a variable, the Light Touch Wizard will automatically go out and read that from the variables.dat and try to auto-populate it. And when you close it out, it will automatically take that and just write it out. Which works out pretty great. And that's how most of the Light Touch scripts, variables, and the wizard works right now. There is an example of if you wanted to modify this by yourself. I sometimes just basically use Notepad and Visual Studio. But Mike Niehaus, one of the main developers for MDT, went out and created a tool called the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit Wizard Editor. It's just go ahead and do a Google search for that. It's available on Codeplex, which is Microsoft's sharing site. And it allows you to go ahead and define some of the common conditions, properties, and variables. There's a particular bug in there right now in that with the new UI style for SCCM, Systems Error Configuration Manager 2012, new UI style, this Toolkit Wizard Editor doesn't work as is. Mike Niehaus does have a blog up right now on how to modify that and how to fix that. But this also allows you to, as you're editing it, also can display previews and try it out. And then you can click the test button here at the top and actually pop open automatically. I did most of these scripts manually, and I can kick them off, but this is probably the preferred way to do that. There's a little note here about debugging web pages. I do like using Visual Studio because it also provides the ability to debug. Just to let you know, let's go into IE here. IE settings, internet options, advanced. And there's two options here: how to disable script debugging, disable script debugging other. If you have if you're doing editing in a full OS environment and you find that you keep getting crashes, and you have Visual Studio installed, disable script debugging is what's preventing the environment from actually doing prompting and actually allowing you to trace through debugging steps. Just click that off. When you do that, whenever you come across a hard crash, a stop, or any kind of break environment when you're doing testing on a wizard script, then if you have just-in-time debugging enabled with Visual Studio, if your script actually crashed, then you would pop up and actually open up Visual Studio. I don't have Visual Studio installed on this machine, so I can't exactly show you, but that's actually one of the first things to do when you're debugging and trying to get that environment working. The other way to do that is actually add the word stop right into your script and code environment. A little note about MSHTA, it's very, very, very finicky. And several people have come up and claimed that, well, I had this working under my full OS, but when I took this off to WinPE, it just doesn't work. Something's not working. There's something wrong with WinPE. 9 times out of 10, it is a bug in the MSHTA code that we have. You think it may be running properly in the full environment, but I just showed you, for example, in MSIE, that MSIE allows you to ignore or skip over certain crashes in the environment. And that's what's actually happening here. The environment is actually crashing, We're skipping over it and moving forward. When you go to WinPE, suddenly that crash is no longer kosher. It's not good anymore. And then it will really, really crash, and it will tell you it's crashing. Then you wonder why it's not working. It worked fine under this environment, which hid all the errors. Now when I go to this environment, which doesn't hide the errors, it's not hiding the errors. It's not working. And that's what's actually happening in this case. So do take some time to actually make sure that it is working properly. Config Manager also provides some environments for hooking. Of course, big one is UDI, which is a component of MDT. There are several presentations this week on UDI. I encourage you to go to those. Those should be great. I'm going to attend those as well. And there's also an ability for pre-execution hooks that are standard defined inside SCCM. Little note here, this is from Mike Niehaus, that he wants to remind people also that don't write your own wizard pages, just extend the MDT pages. And there are a lot of times where you may actually say, no, these pages look horrible, I like them, I don't like them at all, I could do better, these are ugly. I'm going to write it using .NET, a framework, when I'm going to use forms, I'm going to add graphics and pages, and they're going to look cool. The particular problem is, of course, then you can't run it in WinPE. There are other problems. So we may not like MSHTA as an environment, but it is probably the best environment for making sure, guaranteeing that it's going to be cross-compatible against all of your platforms and environments. And it is available on all platforms, so that's one of the advantages. Don't write to custom settings any or bootstrap any. Some people have come back and actually tried to do that because at this particular point, we've actually already processed the bootstrap ini and custom settings ini when we actually run the MDT wizard. So don't go back, and we won't actually process some environments, so it won't work. Now, another opportunity for enhancements are the task sequence editor, and most of you have probably already gone out and created your own steps in the MDT task sequence. Remember, after all the variables are collected, we have the opportunity to kick off certain environments, certain steps in the task sequence, and really they're all just steps, they're command lines that we're going to go ahead and execute. A certain note to remember I'll show you here, what the final deployment screen means at the very end here. When you see the very final deployment screen saying that we're finished, we're done, this is all working, this is great, sometimes you may get yellow, sometimes you may get red. What are the differences between these three environments? And this is yellow, and white means that we've gone through and we're actually parsing through the BDD log file, which is the main log file that MDT writes and while it's going through all the operations. If there were no errors found at all, it's white. If we actually found some errors in the BDD log file, then we may have an error. We'll actually need to display yellow just to let people know that there may be a problem here. Red means something different. Red means that we found errors in the BDD log file, but more importantly, the task sequence crashed. It didn't work, it failed, it died. Why is that? Because as we're running through the task sequence steps here, we're running through each individual step here, the steps should return back 0. It should return back error level 0 to let you know that, yes, we passed, it worked, it was just fine. If the function you called, the particular command line you called returned back something other than an error, then MDT says, woo, we need to stop here. Or depending on whether or not you have the continue on error set. There are some perfectly valid cases where we're running and a command does pass correctly, runs great, except that it returns back something other than error level 0. Robocopy is the classic example. If you run robocopy and copy something from one folder to another, it will return back, I think, an error level 3 or something like that if it passed successfully, which is kind of crazy. Why would it return back an error? And that's just the way the robocopy works. So in this case, if we were to run a robocopy command in here, we would actually decide, well, then we actually have to continue on error. So that means that the task sequence is running along, is continuing going, and it comes across robocopy. It says, I'm going to run the robocopy, but I know it's going to actually return back something other than 0. So I'm going to ignore whatever the results are, and I'm going to continue going. There are some other cases, and this is where, as we get into more debugging environments, and you may have your own custom environment, there are certain cases where we want to crash if it fails. if I'm running format and partition disk and it failed for whatever reason, don't continue. There's something drastically wrong here. We need to stop and, whoa, need somebody to actually, attention, red screen, wow, we need to go back and look at this. But there may be cases where, this script actually just does some extra processing and maybe copies a couple log files up for later processing, but that server may not always work, so it may crash. And we don't care, so just go ahead and enable the continue on error, because even if it does crash, I don't care. We don't stop because of that particular error case. So you have a task sequence step, and we can see here we have multiple, we have initialization, validations, gate capture. There's all sorts of different places on here to add items. For the most part, most people during OS installation, they're going to want to install things during, and there's a space in MDT, custom tasks. Go ahead and install things there, but do be aware of what the other environments are. State capture is a classic example of we're going to be capturing the OS during a refresh scenario. So you're running an old OS, and you need to run a couple of custom steps there. State restore is an example of we're going to be running things when the full OS is up and running. Install, pre-install, post-install are cases where before or after the OS has actually been kicked off, but while we're in WinPE. These are pretty well documented inside MDT, but for the most cases, if you want to install custom scripts, custom applications, go ahead and add them to custom tasks in the task state restore step. So the next opportunity is really custom scripts using VBScript. Again, we're using VBScript, which is kind of a crazy environment. People wonder why don't we use PowerShell, although we have actually added PowerShell to, PowerShell has been added to MDT 2012, and I'll get into that in a second here. But VBScript is really the one scripting environment that's very powerful, very extensible, and it's available on all platforms. XP, 2003, Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8, all environments, all supported operating systems at Microsoft can run VBScript, which is great. You can assume that it's available and it's running and it's working, which is why we want to do that. The first thing that's important about writing to VBScript, we actually use in MDT an extension called the Windows Scripting Host Environment. Basically, that allows us to write VB scripts and actually include them in, and actually include libraries as well. So in this case, the Windows Scripting Host Environment will open up an XML file, which in this case is WSH, and open up various libraries, and then also our script. The most probably important thing, and these are just standard VB script files. There's nothing really that exciting about these. But in our particular case, a couple of things that are important. Again, I mentioned earlier about the BDD log file. BDD log file is what MDT uses to control the environment at the very end. All standard log files are written there. These are very important, and really the de facto way to look at log files moving forwards. The way you want to write to log files, first thing you should probably learn how to do is write using create entry. Create entry is an intrinsic function available through the ZTI utility, which is the main a library function that made available by MDT. And we can write info, warnings, and other error files that we want to persist inside MDT and actually write to the log file. Let's actually try running this here. I closed it out, so start CMD. Yes, I really want to do that. Let's go to use, shows, desktop, great. And then I do have a script here called write to log. So C script, I can type today, CRIPT, write to log file, and then run it. Great, it just wrote the log file, but it just wrote hello world, hello world, hello world, which isn't very exciting. Let's actually open that up and actually make sure that it was actually doing what it's supposed to do. Yeah, and it's the same script here. We're just writing out the warning information. Now, if we run this in the C script, this is the console script host environment. This is the interpreter that runs the VB script inside the environment. It's just going to write to the console, but it's going to write it in the standard text. Now again, for those of you who are familiar with this, there is a great utility called Trace32. Trace32, let's actually go back and actually look at the log files here, mini-nt, smsosd, osd logs, and we can see that it's been writing all information here the whole time to log files. If we were to open up Notepad, we were to open up the log file we just created, here's what it looks like. And it's kind of a little ugly, but it contains a lot of the information here. So every time we run a particular line here, so we're going to write hello world. It logs out the time, the date, writes out the component that actually wrote to it, and also the type. The type in this particular case is type 1 is no error, type 2 is a warning, and type 3 is an error. So let's actually go ahead and trace 32, 7, write to log. In this case, it's slightly more interesting. And structured environment. System center trace32. Trace32 will display, highlight things in different colors and provide an easy way to look at that, which is great because first thing I do, somebody comes up and says, hey, I found an error in my deployment, something didn't work, I got to fix it. First thing I'm going to do is ask for the BDD log file, which is the collection of all log files, and I'm going to go through and search for all instances of red. Remember, red is what kind of drives red and yellow. Red and yellow are what are going to generate those red and yellow screens at the very end of the deployment. Let's actually run this again. This is another cool thing about Trace32. Users, shows, desktop, presentation, C script. Run that again. If we run this again, I want you to watch the background here. Trace32 doesn't have to be opened or closed each time. We can just go ahead and leave it open and actually monitor everything that's running in the background, which is great. We can leave that running, and if we have a script that takes a long time, we can actually see that it's actually running and running properly. So in addition to being able to just write out simple log files, using the APIs available, we can write out information, warning, and errors. There's also creating an event. That's another type of energy environment that's displayed in the documentation that allows us to write specific events, not just every single log file to an upload server. We can also modify the report progress percentage bar for each sub-item. So if you've ever tried to install an application that takes a long time, maybe you see it at the bottom there that it's running a percentage. And we could also have structured failure points where we want to report failures as well. There's also the ability in the ZTI utility to, of course, read and write variables. And this is a good example of, well, we're just going ahead and going to take a variable that we've defined earlier, a custom variable called custom, assign it to a variable called test, and then we can perform an operation like replace the slashes with backslashes with slashes, or vice versa, and then write it back. But with those two components, the ability to read and write variables and the ability to write out to log files, then you take your knowledge of VB script already, custom operations, modifying files, reading other variables, interfacing with databases, XML, whatever you want to do, combine those together, and then you pretty much have an environment where you can pretty much be functionally complete and run all the tasks that you really need to run. Some other environment variable APIs, as I mentioned earlier, we can read and write particular items. List items are kind of arrays of variables. I showed you earlier when reading and writing a particular MAC address, there could be more than one MAC address. So MAC address 001, MAC address 002 if you have more than two machines. That's how you'd be able to read that. And the ability to substitute back and forth using the same processing used in custom settings any file that we saw earlier. A couple of other important commands. There are some run commands available. The advantage of the run commands that are predefined in a ZTI utility are that it automatically will parse out, when you run the command, it will log out the command line, read the error result, log it appropriately, and exit out. I did add a new thing, we did add a new thing, for example, for MDT 2012, run with console logging. Now we can actually run a particular command, and if it's a console program, capture the output and return it back. For those of you who have actually used the monitored MDT in the past and looked at the disk part functions, you've seen that we actually will pipe commands into disk part and actually echo them back out and write them in the log file. And that's kind of the similar thing that's available now with run with console logging. So there's run with heartbeat, run with console logging. We can find particular files in an MDT environment, structured environment. We can run commands, have it log the output, read and write the registry, any files, although that's fairly trivial. And also another kind of important thing, validate connection. Validate connection is a function available in the MDT ZTI utilities. So if you actually needed to connect up to a network share on another machine, you should run validate connection, which is a function available in MDT. What validate connection will do is it will try connecting up to that share. If it's unsuccessful, it will then try connecting up to that share using the credentials provided by the user. So there's no need for you to prompt the user to provide anything. We've already collected the information about the user, the account name, the password, whatnot. Let's use that moving forwards. And that's what MDT uses on the back end as well. For the, a little note about the MDT object model, if you've ever opened up some of the scripts within inside MDT, you've noticed that it contains these class functions. And the ZTI utility also is in a class hierarchical format. It is encouraged but not required to run. In this particular case, I could actually strip out the run new instance, class, the functions, everything except for the hello world. And you saw earlier when I showed you the logging example here, for example, notepad, right to log. In this particular case, all I am doing is importing a ZTI utility and just starting to run the commands. As long as I import it into the environment, those commands are available, they're running, but the create entry, I can run create entry. So what does this class environment do? Run new instance is what kicks off the, initiates the running of the class, and this actually provides, at least within the MDT functions, the ability to have some sort of structured error logging and recovery. And that's what we're doing in this particular case. If there is a crash in a particular, we'll try to capture that and add that to the BD log file. If we were to crash in other environments, in the previous environment there, it would just die and we wouldn't actually get very much logging information. So that's what that is. A couple of tricks. Visual Studio has a built-in debugger for VBScript, and I actually like using that. You can use cscript with a /x command, and it will kick off and run within inside Visual Studio, and you could trace through, run, watch your variables, and it's really very helpful. Use the MDT object model because it does capture the errors, but it's not really required. There are several COM objects that are already predefined within all MDT scripts. Don't go ahead and create those again. WMI, the O shell, OFSO, the file system object, and other environments that people just normally create with their own VB scripts. They're already created in MDT, and no need to do that on your own. I will state, let's see, what was one other thing? Let's just continue going on here with PowerShell scripts here. New for MDT 2012, usage of PowerShell scripts. So we've already seen that MDT, at least on the console side, will use PowerShell scripts to construct everything, construct the environment, and actually do all the processing. But in MDT 2012, there now provides the ability to call PowerShell scripts natively in the environment and actually capture the output and actually process it, which is great. Careful, this is, of course, Windows 7 and newer. Don't try running PowerShell scripts on a very clean Windows XP box because XP doesn't have PowerShell built in, so do be careful about that. So what MDT 2012 does, MDT 2012 actually includes a PowerShell host environment. So this is just so similarly to what VBScript does, we have a host environment for VBScript files that we can import libraries and other operations. Now in PowerShell, we also have another host environment. And what this host environment is, this is an executable that will call PowerShell, but it also adds in a couple other things. We'll add the ability to read MDT variables and the ability to write output to the BDD log file, because we like the BDD log file because that's what's available, because it's processing at the end. So just a simple example here I have. These are write host, write verbose, write warning, write error. These are standard PowerShell command lists that allow you to write to the console, write warnings, write errors. And similarly, I showed you earlier the drive objects. Drive object, for example, for C drive, or the drive object for HQ local machine, registry object. Now we have a drive object for environment variables, and also now TS environments. So anytime you go to the drive object called TSENV, that's going to redirect you to all the environment variables in the SCCM standalone task sequencer environment. So anything that we collected earlier can be read or processed out. Great. Let's see here. I actually have a demo. Let's go ahead and run that. It took me a little tweaking to get this running. Let me make sure it works. So Notepad 8, PowerShell.cmd. We're going to set the deployment share to this root, and then we're going to run the Microsoft BDD task sequence module, this PS host. In the MDT console, it's actually very easy. Just open up a new, the console, add a new step. In this case, the step is a PowerShell script. And then you just add in the line. But if I wanted to run this manually here, which I want to do in this case, because I don't want to actually kick off any scripts, I'm just going to run this task sequence host environment, which opens up PowerShell, will kick off this script and run it. So what does the script do in this case? Notepad 8, PowerShell.ps1. In this case, we're going to write out to the host. We'll see what scriptor variable is. We're going to verbose information, some more errors, some warnings, some more information. So in this case, PowerShell already has the concept of an environment. These are standard Windows path environment variables that are available. One is app data, that's common. And then we're also going to run a task sequencer variable. Now, I must admit, I'm going to cheat here in this case. The task sequence environment is not fully functional on this machine because I'm not running within a task sequence. So I'm going to read it, it's going to be null. Then I'm going to override it and then read it again. Let's actually see what happens here. 8, PowerShell.cmd. Oops, I didn't see anything, probably because it's running in the background, and there it is. So we have, no, that's not it. No, I write to log. So I want to open up start CMD. Let's go to mini-nt, SMSOSD, OSD logs, trace 32, BDD log file. What does it have to say? So as we can see, the component here is the task sequence host. We found a particular environment. We wrote out an information file. We wrote out a warning. We wrote out an error. It actually got more specific here, and not only wrote out the error, but also wrote out the line numbers, which does that in PowerShell for those of you who run PowerShell scripts. And then we ran app data, which we return environment variable. Now we tried reading off that custom variable here earlier, this OS current build, but it didn't exist. We set OS current build to a variable, and then the second time we ran through it actually did appear in OS current version equals 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is an example of a PowerShell script. And that's pretty much most of the kind of scripts that we're, extensibility that we're going to be providing here. Remember, MDT is free. It's available. The scripts are available as well. Go ahead and try it out, tweak it out. That's the whole purpose of MDT. We are running up on time here. I'm going to offer questions here, but I do encourage you to take the opportunity to fill out the evaluations, and please let us know how the conference is going here. But I will open this up to any particular questions. Does anybody have any further questions about PowerShell? Johan hasn't heckled me from the audience yet. A couple years ago, I heckled him from the backstage, and I was wrong. Last year, I gave a presentation. He heckled me, and I told him he was wrong, but he was right, after all. Okay. So anybody have any particular questions about MDT scripting? It's going to be exciting. MDT is hopefully going to be releasing, MDT 2012 will be releasing this week. I've been told this is going to be great. It's going to correspond with the release of SCCM 2012. It's going to be great. Please try it out and go to those forum-sized blogs. There's MVC forums that we monitor all the time. It's going to be great. So thank you very much for attending.